The terrorist attacks in Paris have shaken and shocked the Western world. What must we now do in Europe and in Germany? Questions for Germany's Justice Minister, Heiko Maas. He is convinced that one thing must not be allowed to happen, that we let the terrorists destroy our way of life. The Social Democrat politician is our guest this week. Hello.
Hallo, guten Tag.
And a cordial welcome to you as well, our DW viewers. My name is Alexandra von Namen. Mr. Maas, will we really be able to continue living as before, considering the acute threats?
We'll have to be able to, or else the terrorists will have won. Because the attacks in Paris were attacks on all of us, and especially on our way of life, our open society with freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and respect and tolerance for each other. We can't let them take that away from us. And that's why it's important to hold tight to our values and not to let our way of life be destroyed, because that's the terrorists' real target.
Let's take an example, the international soccer match between Germany and the Netherlands last Tuesday. Initially, it was said that the game should take place, also as a sign of solidarity with France. But then there was an indication, apparently one that had to be taken seriously, of a planned attack. And the game was called off on short notice. So, in this case, the terrorists have won, haven't they?
Yes, and that could happen again in the future. I thought the German Football League was right to initially plan to go ahead with the match. But in the future, for all big events, we'll have to scrutinize whether the security situation in the run-up to the game allows us to say the risk, and there is always a risk, is not so great that we have to fear the loss of human life. But in this case, especially in the last few hours before the match, developments were so dramatic with such specific indications of plans for an attack during the game that we decided to cancel this match. Otherwise, we would have been wantonly endangering people's lives.
You yourself were looking forward to attending this match. When did you learn that there was such a concrete danger that you couldn't enter the stadium?
In the course of the afternoon, we had indications and they were verified. And unfortunately, not until after 6 p.m. did the last report come in that the information we already had did indeed come from reliable sources. And then we responded very quickly and canceled the match.
Were you afraid?
No, to be honest, I wasn't afraid. But maybe that was because we were so busy preparing an important decision. But on Friday, when the attacks were staged in Paris, my brother and his wife were in a Paris restaurant not far from the ones that were targeted, so I worried about them. That's when you see how close this terrorism has come. Sometimes it's just a matter of luck that you weren't in the wrong restaurant.
Did your family discuss the attacks at home? You have two sons, the older one is 13. In an interview, you said he's very interested in what goes on in the world and that he even has a news app. Did you talk with him, or maybe with both sons, about what happened in Paris?
We did, because they asked whether it was safe for them to play soccer on the soccer pitch, and whether we were going to stop going to restaurants. And it's not so easy to answer them. Kids ask very simple, honest questions, and it's not always easy to find an appropriate answer. But I think the only thing that helps is to talk about these things, to calm them down, make it clear that we're doing everything we can to keep something like that from happening here.
What is the German government doing to protect people in Germany from attacks?
In the aftermath of Paris, we've substantially increased security and police presence at critical points. Train stations, airports, and other places where lots of people come together. The individuals in Germany who we think pose a danger, who were already under observation by our intelligence agencies, are now under even more intense surveillance. In some cases, we'll have to go after one or another of them. In recent months, we've also tightened the laws. In particular, these so-called foreign fighters who go from here to Syria to fight for IS in the battles and then come back at some point, radicalized, are a real risk when they return. So we've now made leaving for Syria illegal, which means we can stop them from going there. They are a great danger and have to be especially closely watched. And if we know that one of them is planning on going or is returning, the security agencies have to intervene and arrest such people and take them off the street.
As Justice Minister, you tightened the anti-terrorism laws in Germany after the attack on Charlie Hebdo. But there's been criticism from security experts that it makes no sense to make new laws or tighten them. They say it makes more sense to invest more in police forces, so that those who you think pose a danger can in fact be observed. So do the anti-terrorism laws you've tightened up make Germany safer?
Some say these laws are useless. Some say they don't go far enough. We think that we've taken a prudent middle path. Our orientation has been to change the law only when we're convinced that it will be of use. Ultimately, we mustn't give people the impression that changing a law already makes Germany safer. It really depends on how we use our existing personnel and organization to combat the dangers. And that's why we have 3,000 new jobs with the federal police and hundreds of new positions with the intelligence services. We have an overall concept, and I'm sure that that will provide greater security for Germany.
New measures and suggestions are under discussion after the Paris attacks. Can we go through them briefly? For example, there's the suggestion to give the secret intelligence services more powers and more personnel. Are you for or against this?
Well, we have more personnel now for the intelligence services, and their powers are extensive enough. You could actually get the impression that if intelligence agencies concentrated less on spying on our friends and used their existing capacities better in dealing with the terrorists, that the game would be half won. That's why we're reforming laws governing the Federal Intelligence Service, the BND.
The Federal Intelligence Service law.
We want to give the intelligence services the equipment and personnel they require, because we know that they're essential in combating international terrorism. But we also want proper parliamentary control over them so they don't take on a life of their own. And that's how we're reorganizing things right now.
There's also discussion on whether the security services should have greater access to our personal data across Europe. For example, should information on where people fly be stored? What do you think?
I think that in the foreseeable future, in the next few months, we'll have a new arrangement. Because it's surely prudent to know who is moving where within Europe. That's why I think that in the future, this will be standardized across Europe.
As Justice Minister, in the past, you've always expressed skepticism about such access. Have you changed your mind?
No, in the discussions we're still having, I've always advocated not letting it all get out of hand. I think we have to consider which data should be stored. Does everyone's data have to be stored, including on air traffic within Europe? Or should the data be stored for all of 5 years? Would a shorter period suffice? But I'm confident that we'll find a reasonable system that balances freedom and security, one that finds a good answer.
After the attacks in Paris, some politicians have called for sealing the European Union's external borders and making sure they're closed. What do you think about that?
The Schengen Treaty stipulates that Europe's internal borders ought to be permeable. But the outer borders should be made secure and controllable. We haven't done that adequately in the past, and that's why I think we have some catching up to do. Otherwise, the individual EU states will start closing off their internal borders. And if we start shutting ourselves off from each other, I think that would be a setback for the idea of a unified Europe. But it is true that the external boundaries have to be made more secure than they have been in the past.
Are you afraid that IS fighters could try to enter Germany mixed in with refugees, and that this could change the debate about refugee policy in Germany?
At
At the moment, there's no evidence that that's happening. I'd be very careful about connecting the two. Because the refugees coming to us from Syria are fleeing the same madmen who carried out the attacks in Paris, namely Islamic State. They're victims, not perpetrators. And that's why we shouldn't talk about whether these people are alleged refugees in Germany. It wasn't refugees who carried out the attacks, but people who had lived among us all their lives. People we might have known, but would never have suspected could do something like this. And knowing this means that a responsible discussion would not mix up the issues of terrorism and refugees. I think that is downright irresponsible.
At the
end of every DW interview, we have our 3 unfinished sentences, and I'd like you to complete these sentences. Absolute security is?
Unfortunately, impossible nowadays.
The next time I enter a stadium,
I won't go alone, but together with my children, and I'll act the same as I always have.
For my children, I want a Germany
that is open to the world and tolerant, and in which people who live here show the greatest possible respect for each other.
Mr. Maas, thank you very much.